Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's class on reverse logistics and closed loop supply chains. I hope you're doing well. Both of these terms, reverse logistics and closed loop supply chains, have become hot topics in supply chain management. Therefore, it's very important for us to get an in-depth understanding of what these terms mean and how they are being used in supply chain management nowadays. So, if we look at a supply chain, and we here we have a score model, which is just a general supply chain operations reference model. You can see over here that supply chain generally starts off with the suppliers sourcing certain goods, raw materials perhaps, making something out of those raw materials, and then finally delivering them to the customers. Before all of these things take place, there is a planning activity that takes place. So the planning is what happens first. That is then followed by actually materializing the plan and, according to the plan, sourcing, making, and delivering to the customers. But something that's been happening more and more, especially in the recent past, because of an increase in e-commerce, is that there are a lot of goods that are being returned to the suppliers. And so if you look at a supply chain in its entirety, it's definitely not a one-way flow anymore. In fact, there is a return of goods that is happening quite often nowadays. Now, if we try to understand why goods are being returned back to the suppliers, I mentioned one reason, e-commerce, and I want to discuss more reasons with you now. So, as I just mentioned, it could be you actually go to a store and buy something, and you take it home and you try it on and realize it was the wrong size, or you realize that, what, this color really doesn't suit me, I want to get another color. So sometimes customers return goods to stores because they realize that, it didn't look right when they brought it home. If customers are buying via e-commerce, this is a more common problem, and many times customers look at photos, buy the good. When it arrives, they actually realize it wasn't exactly what they wanted, and they decide to return the goods. Additionally, many times what happens is there are recalls that companies do. So, for example, there might be a pharmaceutical drug that is released in the market, but once it's released, after that, there are some serious side effects that are discovered that weren't found in the product trials, and so perhaps the medication is recalled, and so basically the company requests for all of those medications to be taken off the shelves, and they take those medications back. So in that example, that's an example of product recall. Could happen in, say, it has happened in the case of, for example, automobiles. Many times automobile companies have released models and later on realize that there are some serious problems in it, and they recall. Maybe there's some accidents that happened, and through those accidents they realize that there were some problems in the cars, and they call for recalls. So that's another common reason that when goods are taken back from the company that initially sold them. Sometimes there are overstocks or even poor promotions. So just for example, let's say there's a company and they decide to do a big promotion and have something like buy two get one free kind of a promotion, and for some reason the promotion just doesn't do as well as they expected, and as a result they end up with an overstock. And so a lot of the stores, that the retail stores that were holding their goods, say, you know what, can you actually take your goods back? So that's another reason why sometimes companies are forced to take their goods back. Additionally, sometimes companies give their goods on leases, and so they lease a product for a certain period of time, and then once the lease is over, they take the good back. So again, these are all reasons for product when for the products being returned to the company that originally sold them. Additionally, sometimes goods are sold and they're found by the consumer to be defective, and so especially if there is a product warranty, um, you know customers decide to return the goods. Then there are other cases such as the end of use, for example, cell phones. So in certain situations, perhaps there are cell phones that are being used by consumers, but for some reason they actually feel that they want to buy a better model in the market. So they realize that they no longer want to use the good, and so they go and sell it in a secondary market. Or in fact, the original company that sold the cell phones may say, you know what, we'll take it back at a discounted price. And so they can, and that's a situation where again, the company that originally sold the cell phone would take that cell phone back. There are other situations where there it's just the end of the life. So for example, a product is completely just finished. There's a washing machine that perhaps, let's say, your family bought, and the washing machine is just no longer working, and so it's just sitting almost like junk. But perhaps the company that originally sold it says, you know what, we will buy it at a scrap price from the consumer if it's no longer working. So that's another situation where goods may be going back to the company that originally sold them. And sometimes they're reusable articles. And so, a customer feels that they've used an article, they no longer need it. And so they just send it back to the original company saying, okay, we used it for a certain period of time while we needed it, we no longer need it. And so they can send it back to the supplier. So as we can see, as I just explained, there are many, many reasons because of which goods now are many times being returned to the company that originally sold it. And so, the company first plans, then actually makes the goods, sells it, but then those goods are actually returning back. And this is called reverse logistics. This entire circle where the logistics, meaning logistics was forward logistics, right? It was moving forward. But now when things are being returned more and more, especially because of e-commerce, a lot more goods are being returned. There has been an increase in reverse logistics. So that's a very big trend that companies are having to deal with. And not only that, they then need to figure out what they're going to do with these returned goods, right? And so we'll in this lesson, we'll be talking about how companies deal with these goods that are being returned. All right, next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about what a closed loop supply chain is. And again, it sounds very complicated, but hopefully once I explain it to you, you'll realize that it's not all that complicated. So basically, closed loop supply chains are used in reusable articles. So reusable articles are basically durable products intended to be used multiple times by different users in different locations of a supply chain network. So again, that definition sounds like there were a lot of words thrown at you, but I will explain exactly what it means to you in a little bit. Okay, so let me try to start explaining what closed loop supply chains are. Generally, closed loop supply chains are used in conveyance, in transportation, and also in products themselves. So let me start talking to you about conveyance and when and how closed loop supply chains are used in conveyance. So the biggest example is, and it's very standardized, the containers. And they're usually 20-foot containers and 40-foot containers that have, a lot of cargo. And these containers are put on ships usually and shipped. So again, these containers are reused. So again, this is a reusable article, and it's widely standardized. These as I mentioned, are usually 20, these containers are either 20-foot or 40-foot containers. And so globally, these are standardized. Another example of a reusable item that is used in conveyance are pallets. And again, these are used in shipping. And so on these pallets, goods are piled up. And again, these are then put in containers and then transported. So again, pallets are again a very widely standardized product in conveyance, and these are reusable items. And again, for these, both of these items, and for all of the items I'm going to be discussing, these are all closed loop supply chains, because once the container is used by the shipping company, it is sent back and reused. So these goods are being reused. And so it's not that, the supply chain ends once it reaches the end consumer. In fact, these goods get reused over and over again. That's why they are closed loop supply chains. And a loop is basically a circle. So that's why it's called a closed loop supply chain, because it's used over and over again. These are just some bins where goods again can be put in them and transported or stored. Again, quite standardized. Then if you go to a grocery store and you have these shopping carts. So again, these shopping carts are standardized, widely standardized, and they are a closed loop product, because once you do your grocery shopping, usually these shopping carts are put again back at the entrance. So somebody else reuses these shopping carts. So up till now, I've really been talking to you quite a lot about conveyance goods that are reusable. They have and they're standardized, and they're all, closed loop supply chains. But sometimes there are some highly customized closed loop supply chains as well. And let me give you a couple of examples. About 20, 30 years ago, if people wanted to buy Pepsi or Coca-Cola or Fanta or any of these beverages, they were usually available in glass bottles. And on those glass bottles, the company's product name was specified. And so Pepsi, for example, you would buy a crate of Pepsi bottles, use those bottles, drink Pepsi from them, and then give those bottles back to the retailer. And so this was a closed loop. This is an example of a closed loop supply chain, but it's a very customized product. So again, the Pepsi bottles will only be, again, they're going to make their way back just to Pepsi. So because the bottles are customized accordingly. The Fanta bottles will go, to the Fanta factory so that they could be refilled. But these bottles are an example again of a reusable, conveyance product. So, so that's another example. Some other, examples of highly customized products are that have closed loop supply chains are, inkjets. And so, if for example you have a printer and it runs out of ink, you then have to send this back to the original company, and they will fill it with ink and send it back to you. And you can't send it just to any company. You have to send it back to the company whose product it is. So these are just some examples where you can see that these are all reusable products. And again, reusable products are the ones that have closed loop supply chains. All right, so that was in all, goods being, primarily being used in conveyance, as I just mentioned. But there are some other products that are reusable, consumer products. For example, if you go and get books from a library, generally speaking, what happens is, you pick up a book, you'll check it out from the library, take it home, read it, and then take it back to the library. And then another reader will pick it up and use it. So again, this is an example of reusable articles. And again, closed loop. A consumer picks it up, uses it, brings it back to the original location, and it is used by somebody else. This is an example of shared, in this photo, you can see shared bicycles. And so in a lot of countries, they're promoting, people using bikes for transportation. And so you just go in over here, you pay a small amount of money, and this bike, you can actually rent it out for about an hour or so, ride it, and then there'll be some other stations all around the city, and you can put it in the station, put it back in the station. If you don't put it back in the station, you will get a big fine. So you definitely want to put it back in the station. And that's an example, again, of a closed loop supply chain. Somebody's using the cycle, but they are taking it back to the source. And so therefore it's closed loop. Surgical equipment. And so all of this is an example, these are, all these surgical equipments being used in surgeries. Once doctors use these, it's not that they just throw or toss these tools away. They are then cleaned, sanitized, and then reused. So again, these are closed loop supply chains. One thing to keep in mind is that sometimes it's the demand and supply kind of goes a little bit out of sync. And so if you are managing a closed loop supply chain, you do want to make sure that things are arranged in a way for the new consumers, whoever come into the market, when they, for example, somebody goes to the library, things are arranged in the right way. Books that customers usually like are available. And for example, in the cycle situation, you want to make sure that the cycles, wherever there's heavy traffic, there are more cycles on the stations as compared to other places. So management of closed loop supply chains also requires a little bit of work. Okay, next I'm going to be talking to you about how companies manage products that are returned back to them. So what are the options that companies have once products are returned back to them, and how do they deal with it? So, okay, so if you look at this slide over here, we can see that over here, for example, let's say some resources are extracted. Let's say there are certain minerals, for example, that need to be extracted. Those minerals are extracted, transformed. Other goods are then sourced, added on to the minerals, and then perhaps some goods are made, delivered, and then used by the consumer. But if we, as I just mentioned, there are certain goods that are, being reused or returned, then in that case, what happens is that once those goods go back to the company, and the company goes through and sorts them and then figures out, okay, certain things, perhaps they just want to dispose or throw them away, and they go, into a landfill, meaning, a waste site. But they also have a lot of other options. So if something is just not usable, they will dispose it. But they have a lot of other options of what they can do with goods that have been returned back to them. They could reuse them. They could refurbish or repair them. They could remanufacture them. And if they do any of these three, and I'll explain all of these in detail to you in a little bit, but then if they use any of these three options, they will be using, they will be able to really, send this very quickly back into the supply chain, deliver it, and then it will be sent out to the customers again. So that's if they use, any of these three strategies. Of course, if they decide that the goods that came in, they can be reused, this is, a closed loop supply chain strategy that they'll be using. Other than this, there's some other strategies that they can use, including cannibalize, and recycle. So in the next couple of slides, I will be explaining what each one of these strategies means. And so again, these are all, reverse supply chain strategies that companies can use. So depending on what strategy they use, they will be going back into the supply chain at different points. So if it's, for example, a direct reuse or resale, it will be brought in right towards the end of the supply chain and sent to the consumers. If certain goods are being recycled. It's going to come in earlier on in the supply chain and get processed and then sent to the consumer. So, again, as I explained what each of these strategies is, this particular slide will start making a lot more sense to you. Okay, let us first look at the first option, or the first strategy that companies can use for goods that have been returned. So the first, some of the strategies that they can use include direct reuse or resale. So let's just try to understand what this means. This basically includes both reusable articles, such as containers, pallets, books, and normal non-reusable products. For the reusable products, these are inspected and, if needed, sterilized, cleaned, prepared, for redeployment within firm or across the network. For non-reusable products, they are inspected, deemed ready for reuse or resale to other customers without any repair or refurbishing. For example, it could be a wrong size, color, style, or apparel. So again, just to explain this, in a direct reuse situation, this is an example where, for example, the bottles I gave just a little while ago. So the Pepsi bottles that were reused, and they were sent back to the Pepsi factory. These bottles would come in, they would be sterilized, cleaned, and the Pepsi would be added to them, and then they would be sent back to the user. So this is an example of direct reuse of a reusable article, right? So it's a reusable article, and it's just being sent back. It's again a closed loop supply chain. But there may be a situation where it's not necessarily a reusable article, but the article is, or the product that's come in, there's nothing really, it's not damaged, it's not defective. It's just that perhaps it was the wrong size or the wrong color or the wrong style. The consumer really didn't like it for some reason. So in that case, those goods would be, just checked again in case there's anything wrong in them. Probably, perhaps ironed or just, repackaged, and again they would be sent straight for distribution. And this is the first strategy, and again this is coming in right at the end of the supply chain. So again, it's just being sent straight for distribution to others. Okay, so let's look at another couple of strategies that that companies can use for goods that have been returned. All right, let's look at the first one, repair. This is when used products are returned to working order. Typically involves fixing and or replacing broken parts, for example, computers, phones, electronic devices. Pretty understandable, but I will also, once after I read you the correct definition, I will also give you some examples of each one of these. The next one is refurbish. In this, used products are brought up to a specified quality level. Critical modules are inspected and fixed or replaced. Sometimes includes technology upgrading, for example, an aircraft. All right. The next is remanufacture. Used products are brought up to quality standard as rigorous as new products. Complete disassembly, inspection, part module replacement as needed. All right, so if you really look at this, in these three strategies enter the supply chain at different points. Let's start with remanufacture. So in remanufacture, a product is returned to the company, and this product is completely taken apart, inspected, and it's almost as if it's going to be totally remanufactured. So if the whole assembly is going to happen, and after it's been checked, assembled, then it's going to be sent for distribution and to the final user, and it's going to be as good as new. So it's totally remanufactured. So that's why it starts way ahead, compared to all of these strategies that we've discussed so far. It starts the earliest on. The next is refurbish. And here, this is many times, for example, I have in the past bought a refurbished um, cell phone. And so the refurbished cell phone is basically, the company, the main company. So for example, I bought it from Apple. And so Apple actually said, you know what, we've taken it back and we haven't totally torn it apart. It's definitely not as good as new, but it's in pretty decent shape. We bought it up to a specified quality level, and so they're going to fix it up a little bit and then send it to distribution and then straight to the user. Repairs are when there's something very small that needs fixing, and so just a little bit of work is done to it. For example, one particular perhaps button is non-functional in a phone. I'm just giving an example, or some small thing. If for example, clothing good is returned, perhaps the buttoning wasn't correct, or there's certain buttons missing. Well, those would then be stitched on, and then it would be sent for distribution. So as you can see, each one of these has is a different strategy, but these are all options that the companies have to deal with returned products. All right, next up is cannibalization and recycling. So let's look at what these mean. Cannibalization. In this strategy, the return product is used to recover a limited set of reusable parts and components for use in other products. Only a small portion of the used product is typically reused. The remaining parts are recycled or disposed. And for example, integrated circuits from computers. And then the next strategy is recycling. Materials from used products and components are processed and can be reused in production of original or other parts. For example, metal, paper, cardboard, plastics, etc. All right, so these are a little bit different in the sense that cannibalization, an example of cannibalization is that an old computer is sent back to the computer company. Now, once that old model is sent back, majority of that computer is of no use anymore because perhaps new technology has come in and consumers really don't want the old hardware and all of that. But there may be certain things within that computer, such as certain chips and other intricate machinery that's deeply embedded in the computer that's very valuable for the company, and that can be to a certain extent reused. So the company will go in, take out those particular things that can be reused, and then they will be put back into the assembly. Again, this is usually just a small section of goods that is taken out. Majority is of no use. And so this is called cannibalization. Recycling is basically, and here you see it's right at the beginning of the entire supply chain. Recycling is basically where goods are taken from the old product that has been returned, and these are, various components are taken out, and then they are reused right from the beginning. They are put into production. So it's almost as if those just imagine certain parts are taken apart and then they are completely used in the production process altogether. So it's recycled. It's it goes through the entire cycle all over again. So but these are again old used products, goods are being put into new products, into making new products. So therefore this is called recycling. So now, as you can see, the companies have, that's about 6 different strategies that they can use, but there is one last one as well, which is just disposal. So certain things, for example, out of the cannibalization, the remaining things that are of no use, they can just go into the disposal strategy and, just be sent to a waste site of some sort. So things that are of absolute no use and are beyond, really defective, beyond redemption of any sort, they are disposed and sent to landfills. Okay, so again, if we really think about it, there are quite a few differences between normal forward logistics and reverse logistics. The forecasting, for example, of forward logistics is a lot easier as compared to reverse logistics. It's very difficult for companies to try and forecast how many goods are going to be returned. It's just very difficult to do. The transportation, you know, it's basically, usually it's from one company to many consumers. Here it's the opposite. Many consumers are sending it back to, you know, the company. The product quality, again, once you receive the goods, it's not going to be standard, it's going to be different. The product packaging that you receive the goods back in, it's not going to be uniform. People will be sending it back in different ways. The destination that it will be coming back to the company in is going to be unclear. It's very hard to figure that out upfront. The pricing is not going, is you know, you really can't tell what the value of the good that's going to be coming back is going to be. For the good that's going out to the consumer, you can figure out the pricing and the value of the good easily. Delivery speed, you know, when goods have to be sent to a consumer on forward logistics, it's very important. You want to make sure that the goods are sent as soon as possible to the consumer. But consumers really take their time when they're returning goods. It's not really considered a big priority for the consumer. And so inventory management is, you know, harder. It's not consistent. It's very difficult for you to be able to figure out how much of inventory is going to come in and to manage it. It's just, again, hard to forecast, you know, how much is going to be coming in, and hard to manage it as well, because you really have no idea. In terms of real-time information, it's more readily available in forward logistics, but not so readily available in reverse logistics. Also, distribution costs. In forward logistics, you can use a lot of accounting systems to figure out, okay, this is how goods are going to be distributed, and, you know, the locations and the routes and all. Not so much in reverse logistics. How things are going to be coming back to you, in what form, it's not as clearly visible. So the big question is, all right, all of this is happening, but why are these topics becoming so important? Recently, for example, I went to a library and I saw a huge article in National Geographic on, you know, supply chains and reusable goods and all of these things. And many times, you know, the big publications such as Time Magazine, I've seen articles there, The Economist, many publications have been talking about this. And the question is, why? Why are these becoming so important? And the reason is that we, as the world overall, we are increasing the amount of waste that is being generated. So just to give you an idea, you know, over 300,000 phones are disposed daily in the United States. So that's a lot of phones that are just being, you know, thrown away, finished in one day. Every EU citizen produces about 17 to 20 kilograms of technological waste per year. Many products that are being disposed contain hazardous materials. Electronic devices that are being disposed nowadays, they contain lead, mercury, a lot of, you know, very hazardous products. Also, generally speaking, product life cycles, or the life of products, has been decreasing. You know, initially people would keep cell phones for years, but nowadays the average life of a cell phone is just 18 months, after which, you know, people usually choose to buy a new one. Laptops, previously, you know, once somebody would invest in a computer, it would be for several years, maybe 5-6 years. Now the average life of a computer is just 2 years. Also, more and more regulations are coming out about these issues. In some regions, you know, for example, EU, and this is becoming a very big issue. And they have basically developed frameworks, for example, for batteries, vehicles, tires, and how these should be disposed of in the right way. So a lot of regions, producers are also being held accountable for environmentally safe disposal of products. And so this is called extender producer responsibility. So it's not as if once you sell a good, the company has nothing to do with it. In fact, nowadays, a lot of governments are saying no. If there is a good that is, could be environmentally hazardous, then it is the original company who sold that good. It's their responsibility to safely dispose of that product as well. So with that, I come to an end to this lecture, and I hope you enjoyed it and learned some interesting things. Thank you very much.